Okay. Welcome, everybody. Today's going to be a very interesting day. We have two speakers. I know we originally said one, but we've had an addition to our speakers. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Shilpa Rao, and she will be speaking first. And then when she's done, Richelle should be on. Richelle Flanagan will be coming to us from South Africa for a few minutes. So let me just tell you a little bit about Shilpa. She graduated with a bachelor's in molecular biology in 2017, which means she's really smart. And she joined the Case Western Reserve University Cleveland Clinic Molecular Medicine PhD program in 2018. She's currently in Ignacio Mata's lab looking at sex-specific factors in the PD etiology and plans to graduate at the end of this year. She has always been passionate about women's health and has experience researching pregnancy-related changes in the brain and postpartum depression. Today, she wants to talk about her questionnaire that looks at women's health factors and Parkinson's severity. So, welcome, Shilpa. It's all yours.
Thank you guys for coming. I'm really excited to share kind of what I've been doing, and feel free to ask any questions through the chat or unmuting yourself. Let me share this screen. Okay, cool. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about, as Sharon discussed, this questionnaire that I launched last year in November. And I wanted to make it kind of informal, so I asked Sharon to share kind of a mock questionnaire that is the same that we launched, so that we can compare what this group has experienced compared to what we saw through our study. And so I'll go through that towards the end of the presentation. So I'm sure you guys know that the prevalence of PD is climbing worldwide, and even the economic burden in the U.S. is climbing. And it's really important that we start discussing not only what the risks are, but also what the PD community is experiencing right now. Because often in research they're overlooked. We're more focused on what the risk factors are, but not about what's causing faster progression or more increased severity in PD. And so, as you guys know, there's a lot of factors that contribute to PD. We know that genetics play a role, demographics like age, sex, and ethnicity, and social habits and environmental exposures. However, when the field talks about sex, it's so vague. We just know that men and women have different risk prevalence, but we don't know why that is. Since PD is a neurodegenerative disorder, we have to realize that and acknowledge that men and women experience aging differently. We see that women live longer than men, and there's a lot of homeostatic changes that are occurring that are different between men and women. And so we know that women are more often to use hormone replacement therapy, and that has reduced total mortality in women. Women who have undergone pregnancy, they have long-lasting changes in their brain and neurocircuitry, and that could be related to changes in their aging. And one study even showed that sex-specific surgeries like hysterectomy or removal of your ovaries have played a role in mortality. And so with that, I also wanted to kind of show you guys that PD is very different between men and women. I'm sure everyone has discussed that between men and women, there's different types of severity and symptoms that arise. This is just a quick table, but I just wanted to go over that. More women experience non-motor symptoms on onset than men, which leads to women often getting misdiagnosed or undiagnosed with PD. And that could relate to the delayed age of diagnosis. And so with that, we have to see that within the PD field of research, there's been very little research done in looking at women-specific health factors. I pulled a few papers that discuss the research that revolve around women-specific factors, and I wanted to kind of highlight that a lot of these papers contradict each other. So in 2008, we saw that one study said that hysterectomies or oophorectomies increased the, alongside having menopause at a later age, have increased at an increased risk of PD. Another one said that they did not find any associations between menopause and PD. And that goes on with hormone replacement therapies. And lastly, I wanted to tell you guys that recently a paper showed that there are no genetic differences between men and women that could explain that why men are at a higher risk than women. So with all of this, I think it's important to really parse out what does sex mean when we talk about risk factors of PD. And so that's where kind of my study comes in, where I want to parse out and say, should we look at the X chromosome? Should we look at sex-specific surgeries, reproductive history, and medications, and see if those play a role in the factors of PD etiology? And so my focus was that I wanted to investigate if sex-specific factors play a role in observed differences in severity, because as I said before, while we always talk about risk of PD, it's important to acknowledge that PD severity is different between everyone and the progression as well. So to do this, I wanted to talk about just the sex-specific surgeries, reproductive history, and medication today. We also did do sexual chromosome analysis, but I'm not going to talk about that today. And so with that, we used a questionnaire to address these factors. And I'm sure you guys know that a lot of questionnaires used in the clinic, I use Cleveland Clinic as an example, are very gender neutral. And what I mean by that is that we only ask about daily living experiences that can happen between men and women equally. And then we also look at depression, anxiety, and pain. But we never really talk about daily living that is specific to women versus men. And so to do that, I wanted to launch a questionnaire that does that. And to do that, it was a lot of steps. And so I quickly want to go over it. We first did a lot of literature reviews to see if there were other questionnaires that we could look at and what those results were like. We then developed the questionnaire, and we sought out advice from Parkinson's Foundation, PD Avengers, and other groups and doctors from Cleveland Clinic. And then we also had them revise our questionnaire to make sure that it is relevant and it really seeks to have clinical meaning at the end of the day. We then wanted to make sure that the questionnaire we made is actually applicable. And so we tested this questionnaire amongst 10 women at Cleveland Clinic to make sure that they could do it. It was made sense to them, and it was done in a timely manner. I wanted to highlight that when we submitted to deploy this questionnaire, it was during COVID. And so it actually took us a really long time to get this study up and running. We were waiting for over a year to get this launched. And so this is a very preliminary results from when we got the data, which was in June of this year. So I put a QR code if anyone's interested in reading the paper we wrote in response to Indu's review on the unmet challenge gaps of knowledge in the sex differences of PD. And so we wrote a response to it with our questionnaire as a PDF and kind of stating why we did this. And overall, these were kind of the highlighted variables we wanted to look at. So we wanted to see, in terms of women-specific reproductive cycle, when did PD start? So we asked if it was during regular menses, during perimenopause, or during menopause. And then we then asked about menses experiences and menopause. And then our second part, we really dove deep into sex-specific factors like surgeries, hormone replacement, comorbidities, just overall. I was interested, as Sharon told you, about pregnancy and postpartum experiences because I know how big of a change it leads to your neurological system. And then lastly, birth control history, because a lot of the previous literature wanted to investigate birth control, but there was no consensus in the field. So really quickly, we distributed this questionnaire through Cleveland Clinic, and so we have sent out a bunch of questionnaires through MyChart and are starting to collect the variables through their electronic medical record. This is an old update, but right now we have over 200 responses, and so we're trying to continue that and develop a bigger database, because then we can have a rich medical history for each patient. We then implemented through PDGene, and I'm not sure if a lot of the women here are part of PDGene, but it is essentially a way for women to get genetically tested for free for variants that cause PD. And so what we did is we distributed the questionnaire through that, and we collected their responses along with their genetic status and their clinical and demographic data that they gave to PDG. And so we launched that in November of 2021, and we've had 427 responses, but completely we've had 304 with a full data set. And so I really wanted to go over the demographics, because that is a limitation of our study, because we have a very low representation of Hispanics and Latinos. We have a very high representations of white compared to other races. So we're hoping that by implementing our questionnaire through other organizations, we can really have a better representation of diversity. So overall, I wanted to kind of show you what the characteristics of this entire data set of 304 women were. We had a pretty good representation of those with genetic mutations. So a lot of women had GBA or LARC2. The overall age was around 65. Age of onset versus age of diagnosis, I thought was interesting, because we can see that there's about like a 3-year delay of when a woman said that she started experiencing symptoms versus when she got actually diagnosed. And we wanted to make sure that the women who took this test were cognitively able to and not impaired. So we looked at the MoCA score, and we saw it as 27. So that means that they're, high active and cognitively coherent, so that the questionnaire wasn't an issue for them.
Well, excuse me, Shilpa, what does MoCA stand for?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's the Montreal questionnaire. So it is basically a cognitive test. So it asks you questions that make sure that you're not having any impairment in your thinking and how fast you're able to respond to things. So it makes sure that your cognition isn't declining as fast, because the UPDRS, it asks about daily living, but the MoCA is really cognitive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem, sorry about that. So as I mentioned before, I'm not interested in looking at PD risk, and also because we don't have women without PD to compare, I was really interested in looking at severity. And how I wanted to do this was look at UPDRS scores. And so we used a paper previously published that made thresholds of mild, moderate, and severe PD based on their scores. And as you guys may know, that UPDRS is broken down into 4 parts. So we made thresholds for each part. So each part has a mild versus moderate severe cohort. And so right here is just showing you that out of the questions, there's only a certain number that women can miss that can be included in our study, to make sure that we're not skewing our data with missing information. And so what I wanted to show you at this bottom part was, for part 1, we had 160 women part of this cohort, 302 for part 2, 141 for part 3, and 139. And so I wanted to show you guys that we had a pretty good representation for each part, and so we were able to make these severity cohorts. So when we divided it up between mild versus moderate, we can see that the current age is pretty similar. Age of diagnosis is a little bit higher in mild versus the moderate severe cohort, but disease duration, as we expect, is very significantly different, because those who had PD for longer could have a more moderate to severe phenotype display of PD than those with mild. And so this chart right here is just showing you our distribution. So in our mild cohort, we had a pretty large representation, meaning that PD generation, a lot of the women who took this questionnaire had a very mild UPDRS score overall for all 4 parts, compared to the moderate severe, where we had less than 50. And so how we analyzed our severity group really quickly is that we just did a simple regression first. So I wanted to show you guys that we looked at each variable in relation to having a more severe PD. And so with those variables of interest, we then put them into a multiple regression. So we took all those variables and made a model to look at the outcome of being more moderate or severe. And so this was able to not only bring down the number of variables that we're looking at, but also shows that those of interest, what is causing the phenotype of having a more moderate severe phenotype. And so what we did was that we adjusted for age, any PD medication that a person was using, and disease duration, because those things would be more associated to a moderate severe phenotype. So we had to adjust it to make sure there was no influence of those factors in our model. And so what we saw was, for each part, in the white box, I put down what the variables were significant in the simple regression. And then in the dark green, what was the final outcome from our multiple variable regression. So for part 1, we saw that PTSD, depression, medication was less effective during menses, having tubal ligation or your tubes tied, and also delivering your child through a vaginal delivery method were significant in the moderate to severe phenotype. So we combined all those variables into part 1, into the model. We saw that depression and the child delivery method of vaginal birth was significant. For part 2, we saw that loss of smell, depression, peripheral neuropathy, once again, medication felt less effective during menses, PD onset during menopause, mastectomy, and perinatal depression, so having depression during your pregnancy, were all significant in our simple regression. However, when we combined them all together and adjusted for those 3 variables I mentioned before, only depression was significant. For part 3, which was the motor test, we saw that LRRK2, B12 deficiency, and women who had a the experience of having a total hysterectomy were significant. And those all actually came out to be significant once we put them all together and adjusted for age, medication, and disease duration. For part 4, even though we had a lot of variables show up in our simple regression, none of them came out when we combined them all together. And just some examples of the univariate, the simple regression variables were loss of smell, depression, medication feeling less effective, again during menses, having diabetes during pregnancy, having a bacterial infection during pregnancy, or just having a history of flare-up migraines were significant. but overall, none of those came out at the end. And so I thought this was pretty interesting because a lot of these factors have not been talked about when we talk about PD, especially about PD severity in women. And so overall, I wanted to kind of talk about some of the conclusions I made based on previous literature. So as you guys saw, sorry, my cat, overall, depression showed up a lot of times throughout in our moderate to severe cohort. And the caveat is that we don't know if our model is indicating that depression is significant because it is a symptom, like a symptom of PD, or if it's a symptom of having a moderate to severe phenotype leading you to be more depressed because you have a more severe PD lifestyle compared to others. So hopefully we can parse that out with a better data set with more clinical data. For the vaginal birth, we have never seen that come up in PD literature and a lot of other literature, so it's pretty interesting. Usually we see that C-sections have more of an adverse outcome when it comes to women and their well-being. So we're hesitant with this finding, but hopefully we can see that if we replicate our modeling in another cohort. LARC2 was pretty interesting. We saw that it was very significantly associated with part 3, the moderate to severe cohort. And the previous literature in the field has shown that women have a higher carrier status of this LARC2 mutation than men. And there has been differences in presentation and medication when you look at men and women with LARC2. Usually medication, women have a higher dosage than men. And for presentation, we see that smell is a really important factor when it comes to LARC2 mutation. For B12 deficiency, I thought this was a good thing that it came out because it's often overlooked in everyday care. And we see that B12 deficiency is more common in women, and it's correlated with neurodegenerative issues and peripheral neuropathy, which we saw was suggested in the simple regression. So I think it's really important to see that in the moderate to severe cohort, there is more often B12 deficiency than those with women with a mild phenotype. Lastly, we saw total hysterectomy. And as I mentioned before, there have been some studies looking at total hysterectomy. And so when I say total hysterectomy, I am indicating removal of your uterus and your ovaries. And so it's important to bring this up because it is a very common procedure. 1 in 3 women have this procedure by the age of 60. And even though there isn't a consensus in the field of if it is a risk factor, it's interesting to see that it is showing up more often in the moderate to severe cohort of women than in the mild. So obviously this is a very exploratory beginner study because not a lot of studies have looked at severity. None of them have a questionnaire that is women specific with PD. And so I wanted to kind of go over what we're facing and how we can overcome the limitations of this study. So we've only launched it through PD-Gene, the data that I showed. I haven't shown you the data from Cleveland Clinic because we're still actively recruiting. And so as I showed you, we have a skewed representation of women, and which was non-Hispanic whites. And this is important to address because societal norms and culture between ethnicity and race can be very different. And so women can have a different association with birth control or these sex-specific surgeries if they're coming from a different region. And so to overcome this, we actually got an NIH grant to launch this questionnaire across America, Central and South America as well, to actively recruit and increase our representation of Hispanics. And so that can allow us to look at regional differences between women with PD and the factors that lie with them. And also look at if our variables are universal across all women, so we can better advise women and look for preventative treatments for lowering their chances of a higher PD severity phenotype. With PD gene, we only had one time point for their UPDRS, and that caused us to base our severity cohorts on only one time point of assessment. And so this is a problem because maybe a woman was having a very off day that day, and so she was automatically put into the severity cohort when she really should be in mild, vice versa. And so with our cohort at Cleveland Clinic, we can have all their time points of assessment and make sure that they indeed should be in the moderate to severe cohort. And so hopefully with that, we can better classify our women and make sure that we're not putting women in the wrong group. Lastly, because it took us a long time to launch our questionnaire, we had a very small sample. And so we weren't able to replicate our findings. And so we're hoping to build a bigger database and replicate our findings so we can make sure that the variables I am talking about with you guys today are indeed associated and not just one just by chance coming up in this cohort. And it's not just a PD gene issue with the women who have presented and their data, but it's overall a common thing amongst women. And so with that, I want to take any questions because the next few slides, I want to go over kind of the responses I got from you guys in the questionnaire and compare it to the PD gene questionnaire results.
Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to go through the next slides, and then if anyone has any questions, please interrupt me.
Yeah, just put your questions in the chat. We'll monitor the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. So I wanted to pull out some important questions. So you ladies, we had about 35 responses. And so I'm sorry, I didn't have, I wanted to pull this as close to the session as possible. So on the left hand is what you guys responded, and in the black text is what the PD gene results were. So when I asked about pregnancy and how many people experience what, we saw that a lot of women had C-section, vaginal birth, and all people who had children had it prior to PD. When we look at our PD gene results, there were women who used IVF, and we had a high incidence of vaginal birth. We only had one person having a child after PD, so pretty similar across you guys and PD gene. When we asked about difficulties with pregnancy, we only saw that a few had with fertility, so conceiving a child, childbirth, and just reaching full term. When we asked PD gene, we also saw that there was a high instance of fertility issues. And when we look against the national average of fertility issues, we actually see in the PD gene cohort a very high instance compared to within the USA. So I thought that was pretty interesting to note. When we asked about any issues dealing with pregnancy-related disorders, such as eclampsia, diabetes during pregnancy, having that viral or bacterial infection, or depression throughout. We didn't see too much from you guys, but within our PD gene cohort, we did see a pretty high instance of postpartum and depression during pregnancy, while we have a little bit lower for depression during pregnancy and postpartum depression. For breastfeeding, I think it's important to ask this. We saw a higher instance of women who breastfed in this cohort compared to PG. And so when I asked about when did PD symptoms start to begin in relation to your reproductive cycle, we saw pretty similar comparison between you guys and PD, where most have experienced it in menopause. And then we saw that the next biggest instance was during regular menses. And while we see that only like about 14% had it during regular menses, in PD we saw about 18%. And last, only a small group, 10%, experienced it through perimenopause, while we saw only 9% in PDG. So that was pretty interesting. When I asked about surgeries, we did not have anyone address that they had a total hysterectomy, but we had a few that said partial. And then also removal of ovaries and a mastectomy. We did have a high instance of total hysterectomy and removal of ovaries, the oophorectomy, in PDG. So there's a big difference between you guys and PDG data set. And then when we asked about birth control, a high instance of women said they used the pill, which was similar in their PDG. And it's important to note that a lot of the literature in the field looks at hormone replacement and birth control. And so it's important to note that we do have a big representation of women using the pill compared to other forms of birth control. Lastly, I wanted to highlight about if women had any disorders related to hormones or autoimmune. And so what we saw was that comparing polycystic ovarian syndrome, while no one said in this group they had it, we had about a 6% representation in PG. Hyper and hypothyroidism was pretty common, and also within our PD gene data set. IBS was actually high in this group, which was novel because we did not have anyone with that. And breast cancer as well was 18%. So overall, we have a little bit of a different representation of these disorders compared to our PD gene. And so I think it's really important to highlight that we should look at other women, bringing more people to take the questionnaire so we can address these women-specific health factors in relation to PD. And I think it's a great start to do that through asking the patients their experience. And so these are my acknowledgements. I wanted to acknowledge my lab, Ignacio Mata, our collaborators, and for all you guys for listening and contributing to my passion and hopefully bringing more answers to women about their specific factors in relation to this growing disorder worldwide. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
All right, well, before we take any questions, I'm going to have Richelle do her quick presentation, and then we'll just open it up to everybody. I think that will be the easiest way to do this. So I would like to introduce Richelle Flanagan. And 1 second, let me get her bio. I just had it. Okay. And she's actually spoken to this group before, but Richelle has she's a registered dietitian, and she lives in Ireland. And she's a World Parkinson's Congress ambassador, a committee member of the Dublin branch of the Parkinson's Association of Ireland, and co-founder of the Women's Parkinson's Project, and co-founder of MyMovesMatter.com, a digital health app for women living with TD. And she's going to speak to us about the app real briefly and how this fits in with the research that Shilpa's been doing. So welcome to Richelle, who is in Cape Town. How was your match today? Did you win?
No, we lost again. We lost to Argentina.
Oh, no.
So,
okay.
bit bummed about that. But yeah, so I'm currently in Cape Town in South Africa playing for the Irish Masters over 50s field hockey team. And actually there are 8 American teams here, believe it or not. So I think they're doing quite well. So I'm just very grateful for Sharon to introduce me here tonight to talk about the app that I'm working on. Myself and Sharon are involved in a women's group, along with Shilpa, about trying to drive kind of research and the needs of the unmet needs of women with Parkinson's to drive the agenda forward so that we can get better care than we're currently getting at the moment. So just kind of give a bit of a backdrop. Basically, we know in terms of unmet needs of women with Parkinson's, there are actually, and actually, sorry, that should say 4 million women worldwide, not under 60, just in total. So, often Parkinson's is seen as being an older white man's disease with a tremor. But we know that that's not the case, that actually 40% of the people living with Parkinson's in the world, which is 4 million, are women. And in fact, in some countries in the eastern parts of the world, Parkinson's is actually higher in women than it is in men. So it indicates as a kind of environmental, perhaps, factor. We also know that women take longer to get diagnosed with Parkinson's than men, and that our symptoms are heavily impacted by menstrual cycle, pregnancy, and menopausal transition as well. There's no clinical guidance on how to adjust medication to these hormonal fluctuations across these different stages of our lives. And also women tend to end up in nursing home care earlier than men do, often have a higher cost of paid care than men will do, and suffer more drug side effects such as dyskinesia and dystonia, which are not really been managed on a sort of gender basis or sex basis. And we do not often receive the specialist care that's needed as often as men do. So in terms of, I suppose, just the backdrop, my own experience as being diagnosed, I actually picked up with Parkinson's while I was pregnant, myself working as a dietitian in my clinic. Through my handwriting, that's why I picked it up. But one of the things subsequent to giving birth to my daughter and then my menstrual cycle appeared back was that I noticed that my Parkinson's symptoms got much worse before my menstrual bleed. I did a survey of women, of which 147 were still menstruating, and 86% of them said their Parkinson's symptoms were worse the week before the menstrual bleed, and another 49% said it was worse at different stages around their cycle. And this is really, flattening a lot of younger women with Parkinson's disease. But also, we asked, what symptoms specifically get worse. So it was bradykinesia and rigidity, tremor and dystonia were one of the ones that were the highest. And then in terms of non-motor, just on the back of what Shilpa said around, anxiety or depression, in terms of the non-motor symptoms, the key one was fatigue. And then anxiety and depression were high up there, along with insomnia and excessive sweating. And also we asked in the survey that I did of women who were in the perimenopause, did they find their symptom control difficult during that? And there was a high percentage that said yes. And also we asked, were Parkinson's symptoms worse or better postmenopausally? And the results were kind of about the same, but there were some people worse and some a little better. Now the cohort for this is actually quite small. So we need more research like Shilpa's doing to uncover the answers in more detail. We also asked about, whether people had hormone replacement therapy, and, a large percentage said no. And this is actually quite important, again, on the back of, say, Shilpa's results. We do know there is some research to show that an oophorectomy puts you at a higher risk of developing Parkinson's. so that really people should be put on HRT if they have an oophorectomy or a hysterectomy. So these are kind of things that we need more research on to protect us. Also, we asked within the survey, did your neurologist engage around the hormonal effects on your Parkinson's symptoms? And basically, a huge percentage of women said that basically the neurologists really, in essence, didn't engage around adjusting medication around menstrual cycles, talking to women with regard to, Parkinson's symptoms worsening around perimenopause or postmenopause, didn't discuss HRT. So a lot of these issues are impacting many women with Parkinson's. This led us to basically to write a paper. So some of you might know Indus Subramanian and Adrian Keener, and there was also world expert Elena Morrow from Italy, and then Sonia Mather, you're probably familiar with, and Anne Lien, who's actually a gynecologist with Parkinson's in Holland, and myself wrote this paper, which is really about the fact that we are not small men and that we have specific unmet needs. And really, part of that journey for me was, realizing that there is no tools out there, to help women actually monitor and track and understand what's going on from their specific gender and sex needs. So I took part in a thing called a digital hackathon. So basically I was asked to go forward as a kind of Parkinson's champion to suggest a way to solve some of our needs through basically technology. So I took part in this health hackathon at the end of last year. It was during lockdown still, and it was out in Basel in Switzerland. Basically, there was a team of people who came together, and I said, look, it'd be great if we could develop an app to track, Parkinson's symptoms around the menstrual cycle and medication intake, just a very basic sort of use case. And anyway, long story short is a load of people helped me come together and put together a sort of prototype, and we won the hackathon. I was completely blown away. And that basically is what has led me to develop the My Moves Matter app. And my co-founder is a gentleman called Rene Reinbacher, who actually has 14 years experience in sort of data science and advanced analytics, in specifically working in the financial area for the last 14 years. But he really saw how, there's so much that can be done to help women with Parkinson's in terms of using that data to be able to actually help us live better with our Parkinson's. So the two of us have been working on it since the beginning of this year. I've basically applied for feasibility funding here in Ireland. I've also taken part I applied for a sort of accelerator program here in Ireland, backed by the Enterprise Ireland. And so through these and the Health Hackathon, have raised some funds to be able to develop what we call a minimal viable product of the app. And we've kind of gone forward and won a few pitch competitions as well. So it's an opportunity to share to a wider audience the needs of people with Parkinson's. We also have a clinical advisory board, which is made up of Dr. Subramanian, another Professor Jane Alty, who's a professor of neurology, who's currently in Tasmania, Dr. Maria Teresa Ferretti, who's the Chief Scientific Officer for the Women's Brain Project. And if anyone's interested, they're a fantastic organisation doing a lot of work to raise the needs of women with brain conditions and the sex and gender needs. And then I say Dr. Anlena Osterbrand, who's a gynecologist and researcher who works with Professor Bas Bloem and Bart Post in Holland. So basically, this app is not just kind of made up out of my head. We actually did 2 focus groups during the hackathon, one with patients with women with Parkinson's and also then one with neurologists. I got the feedback from there. We also did 15 interviews with women with Parkinson's across different ages and life stages and Parkinson's stages, because it's not just about younger women, it's, as we know, it's across the whole life cycle. We also interviewed 12 neurologists in terms of what they feel is needed. We did a workshop then specifically with some women from the interviews, and we did a quantitative survey with 84 women. So we have a website at the moment, and we have about 100 registrations on that. So in terms of the app, the whole idea is really to have, a solution or, a Parkinson's buddy in your pocket so that you can access information, access expert information on the go at any time. Many of us are up at all sorts of hours of the night and feel quite alone. But one of the key features is being able to track your medication track your symptoms, and actually get feedback as to what's working for you and what's not working for you. So just to kind of give you an idea here, as I say, it's going to allow you to track your symptoms, track your medication, track, for some women, say, their periods, to do journaling, and also to get customized feedback. So you'll see here, it just shows you here that it would allow a woman to see what symptoms are getting worse at what point in her menstrual cycle, so that she can have, a validated evidence to show her clinician to say, this is what's happening to me and I am absolutely floored and I need you to treat me. And then also to have customized content, because we know many of us actually struggle to get access to dietitians, physios, SLTs, OTs, all around the world. So to get access to customized advice, but also that, that advice would be also tailored to what your particular symptoms are. And finally, one thing that came back through the women in terms of the interviews was that community, as we know, just like here with Sharon, with an amazing community, is to be able to connect people around the world to different communities where they live, or, they can connect with each other, like Sharon's, from all different parts of the world, is a really important part of looking after ourselves. So ultimately, the idea behind Mind Moves Matter is to give you the power to take your medications on time and see how they affect you, because we do know it's a high percentage of people who are not taking their medications on time, forget, don't realize the importance of the timing. And so actually having something that, I've tried every single app out there, but there's nothing that really sort of works well. I know many of my friends with Parkinson's have struggled to find the right tool. So that's a really important part in terms of timing. And also there was one woman who sort of said, as you kind of progress a little bit, you get more and more meds, and it's hard to know and remember when to take them. And there's different ones at different times and different amounts. And also to be able to see, well, if they add in a medication, well, has it made a difference or has it not? So the other thing then is seeing symptom patterns around, what you eat. So we know things like timing your meals around your protein, and your meals may, have an impact. Exercise, we know that exercise is the only thing that at the moment that potentially might slow progression, but certainly improves symptoms. And again, you'd be able to see that through the app. Well, when I did my exercise, did I feel better? So you can actually get that sort of what they call a sort of virtuous circle of positive feedback, to what you're doing. Is it working? Looking at your sleep, we all, in the survey we did with the women, showed that sleep was absolutely essential in terms of, being better with your Parkinson's or worse with your Parkinson's. And obviously stress is also a key one. And women who are often the captains of their houses in terms of working and looking after kids and older parents and grandkids or whatever, they have a lot of different stresses going on. So that, has, again, a sort of gender impact. Seeing the impacts of your hormones on your symptoms, whether it is through your menstrual cycles, whether it's through your menopause transition, whether it's taking HRT, noticing when you take hormones or, what's going on. Learning what will help you feel better from Parkinson's therapists. So giving you access, as I say, to expert information to help you find out what's going to really help, if it's dystonia or if it's restless legs, what things immediately in the app you'll be able to kind of get answers. And also ultimately to feel better by adjusting your behavior. So based on what you put into the app and what feedback you get back, it'll help you to actually say, oh yeah, well actually, it works for me if I exercise at this time, or it works for me if I take my medication, half an hour before my exercise because I'm more on, so I feel better, I can cycle better, whatever it might be. Obviously, stop feeling isolated by being able to connect with other women, sharing your insights with your neurologist, nurse, or therapist so they can optimize your treatment, so they can see, well, actually, your off times are here and here, and so this maybe isn't a good time to, exercise, or maybe you need to adjust this to help with your sleep. And obviously, a key part, and talking in terms of Shilpa's amazing work that she's doing for us, is to encourage women through this app to actually take part in research studies, that we would bring research to the women as well. So I'm just coming to the end because I'm conscious of time. Sorry, now my screen just stopped there. So I'm actually, in terms of trying to get this app, I'm funding what we call the first round, the MVP, the minimal viable product. But ultimately, we want to launch the full app at the World Parkinson's Congress next year in Barcelona. So but we're kind of in a catch-22 because it's a case of, people say, oh, it's a relatively small disease, and trying to get funding to get the app built. And we need to see, that women with Parkinson's want this. And And it's a difficult area to get funding for. Women's digital health is far behind men's, as it is in everything. So I'm actually going to do a crowdfunding campaign in November, specifically within the Parkinson's community. And what I'm going to be asking people is to pre-order the app. Obviously, it's not going to be ready straight away. I'm going to be asking for roughly about €100, $100 for that. But what you will get in return for that is you'll get 3 years free access to the app when it has all of the different functionality. You will get that all free as it comes along. But also you'll get instant access. I'm going to be putting together a Nutrition for Parkinson's online program, which would have a value of about €250. You'll get that instant free access to that by signing up for the pre-ordering the app in November when I do the crowdfunding campaign. So in terms of who can order the app, I was thinking initially, well, maybe it'd just be women, but actually it could be, family members who feel that it would be something that would benefit their mum or their sister, or it could be people who are working with Parkinson's who want to support women with Parkinson's, and also maybe want to learn about nutritional Parkinson's by being able to get access to that as well, or simply, paying it forward for women with Parkinson's who can't afford to buy the app in this pre-order. And also might be simply that people just want to support the campaign. So if you're interested in signing up and finding out and supporting the crowdfunding, the website is mymoosmatter.com, and you can just register there, and I'll be letting people know when the crowdfund it's going to be on the Indiegogo website. And at the moment I have a free ebook up there about how to manage food cravings, which is a big area for women as well. We know that women suffer more from food addiction with Parkinson's than men do as well. So that's it. I'm going to stop there.
Okay. Well, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the slides that I always show at the last with the announcements, and then we will go to questions and answers because we're going to run over. And I don't want you to miss out on some of the things. So Ashlyn, can you put the slides up? First of all, I want to thank both of you for speaking today, Shilpa and Richelle. We have virtual tiaras for both of you. So thank you. Very informative, and you can see how the research that Shilpa is doing dovetails with what Richelle is doing, and hopefully it will benefit all of us. Okay, next slide. We have a lot going on. Scholarships for the World Parkinson's Congress for first-time attendees only. The registration goes up this week for the World Parkinson's Congress. If you have never been, we're going to have you contact us first. Do not fill out an application for the Congress yet. And we'll have you contact me. In the next newsletter, I'll tell you who to send your email address to get the information to apply for the scholarship. But in addition to our scholarships, if you are YOPD, young onset, Richelle and other ambassadors to the WPC have put together a travel fund for people with young onset who cannot afford the travel. So you can apply for a scholarship through them as well. And we will give you all of that information. Thank you, Laura Russell, Ethel Meyer, and Carol Putney for putting all of this together for us. They will be handling all of the details. Next slide. Okay, in 2 weeks, we have Parkinson's Across America joining us. And this will be our first ever hybrid event. So those of you in Los Angeles, if you want to, you're welcome to come to my home, and we will be in my backyard. You just have to email me, and I'll send you my address. For everybody else, we want you to be there. They will be talking. They're two men with Parkinson's who are working through the Parkinson's Foundation, creating a documentary on Parkinson's called Parkinson's Across America. They will be interviewing people, telling you about their project, and this may be your chance to be on the big screen. And then October 30th, I will be out of town, but I'm very happy to say that Susan Lehman will be hosting that meeting for me, so I can travel now and not have to worry. Stacy Macaluso, who's been here before, I think I misspelled her name, from Mission PD, and she will be doing some exercises with us, but also talking about her advocacy passion which is to get the national plan to end Parkinson's Act passed. So she'll be talking about that as well. Next slide. T-shirt sale ends tomorrow. We have wonderful, wonderful sweatshirts. I love my sweatshirts. T-shirts, tank tops. If you are going to the All-In conference and you want to have a T-shirt or sweatshirt, you need to order it now so that you get it in time. This is our only fundraiser. So it ends tomorrow. So please check us out. I think Ashley can put the link in the chat for you. And it is there. Okay, and next slide. And Moving Day LA is next Saturday. If you want to join us, to walk with us, please join our team. We'll put that link is also in the chat. And if you want to make a donation to our team, you're welcome to. We are currently #1 in LA. Yay! Team Twitchy Woman. So I want to thank all of you who are taking part in that. Jen Heath, yes, thank you. All right, next slide. I think, okay, our Tuesday morning, Anything Goes is going strong. If you're interested, contact Shelley Savoy. Next slide. And we have our Sunday mornings with Twitchy Women. And Sunday morning, Twitchies Without Partners, I'm sorry, has been meeting an hour before this meeting, and it's really nice for those women who are attending. So if you are single and want to connect with other single women with Parkinson's, that would be the visit to join. Just let me know. And that's it from my slides.